And breaking news right at the top of the bulletin. After a period of relative calm, there is trouble again on the LAC with China. Reports are coming in that Chinese troops took 5 Indian civilians into their custody earlier this month and released them in after 4 days, only after the army stepped in and there were talks between both the sides. What's worrying is the incident in Chumar area happened very much in the Indian territory, a few kilometers on the Indian side of the line of actual control. Army says all those apprehended were civilians not connected to the army in any way. Meanwhile, Chinese troops said that Indians were grazing their cattle on Chinese territory and escorted them back to their side forcefully. And for more in this, we are now being joined by our defense correspondent Jugal Purohit. Jugal, what is the latest? When does this incident happen and what are the details that we are gathering from the Indian Army?
Well, Ankit, what we are aware of is that this incident took place between the 3rd and 4th of December, and it's extremely interesting because initially what we did learn from our sources in the army is that some of our nationals had accidentally ventured too close to the LAC, after which they were picked up by the Chinese, and then subsequently using the existing peace and confidence building mechanisms, the Indian Army had raised the issue and subsequently the Chinese PLA returned these people. But what we are now learning from our sources in the army is that there is the likelihood of another version, and in that what we are given to understand is that some ponies of Indians had crossed over the LAC accidentally, after which Indians went over to actually retrieve them, and that's when the Chinese caught up with them and apprehended them for crossing the LAC, and after which the Indian Army subsequently got them out. But it only goes to show, Ankit, that there is either some sort of confusion about just what this incident was all about, and it's a little surprising that exists because this incident is almost 10 days old as we speak. And even though in this case the Chinese have given over our individuals in an amicable way and has not led to a flare-up.
Right.
But there are some questions which are still, rising about just how and what exactly took place on the LAC.
Exactly, and these questions are being raised on both the sides. We also have Mr. Brahma Chelani. He's a defense expert. Mr. Chelani, this is not an isolated incident. We have seen many such provocations from the Chinese side on the LAC. How do you see this latest incident?
Well, there are two aspects of it which are worrying. First, the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement that was recently signed in Beijing during Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's visit. That agreement has shown that it is unable to tame China's belligerence. And the second worrying thing is the fact that this particular detention of 5 Indians happened 12 days ago. The Indians were picked up and taken away on December 3rd, and they were held at least for 24 hours, if not for a longer period. Now, it's taken the government of India 12 days to divulge this news to the Indian public.
Yeah.
And this is part of the pattern that we see. Whenever a Chinese provocation happens, the Indian response is to first hide the news from the Indian public.
Yeah.
And then reluctantly, after the passage of many days, this news is then leaked to the press through quote-unquote sources.
Yeah. Sir, we also have Mr. Uday Bhaskar joining us right now. He's a strategic affairs expert. Mr. Bhaskar, this comes after the Prime Minister had in fact has met the Chinese counterpart. They spoke about the border mechanism, joint border mechanism. What happens to all that? Does this mean that China is not taking us seriously?
No, on the other hand, I would suggest, Ankit, that this is actually a test for the new border management framework that India and China have agreed. And it is really to deal with such situations where, particularly when it comes to the local people and those who have their livelihood dependent on both cattle and the ability to access grazing fields.
Yeah.
Now, I would suggest that the way in which this is addressed and hopefully resolved would be a test for the efficacy of the new border management agreement that both sides have in place. And I think it would be useful for us to get more information about where these 5 Indian nationals were apprehended and the manner in which they were handed over to the Indian side. Because India and China, if you remember, after the Depsang incident in April of this year, have at the political and diplomatic level agreed that this is a complex issue and we need to have the equivalent of a satisfactory mechanism, because the earlier procedures were obviously not adequate, which is why we had the Depsang kind of incident. So I would at this point just advise saying that let us see the manner in which the issue is resolved and also how they were treated. I mean, if you have the equivalent of cattle grazers who are moving as part of what you might call as their legitimate function, which is to follow their cattle and see how they can access the best grazing fields, I think there is the same kind of issue, if you remember, we've had even in the case of fishermen.
Sir, but as Mr. Chalani was saying that why is the Indian government so apprehensive about making these incidents, coming them into public light? It completely shows our government on the weaker side. It shows that we actually do not want people to know about it. It seems that we are trying to hide it. Why should we hide it? Shouldn't we take it to the international community too?
No, I'm saying that at this point, frankly, I don't think it serves any purpose to take it to the international community because, again, let me add that I cannot speak on behalf of the government. But incidents of this nature cannot really be hidden, if you know what I mean. So I don't think the government of India, would adopt a policy where they would try to, quote unquote, hide such incidents. But yes, I think as far as the media is concerned, a certain degree of providing information in the appropriate manner would be desirable, mainly to ensure that we do not have a cascading kind of situation where we have an incident which then takes its own momentum if it is not appropriately interpreted and the facts on the ground are not conveyed to people who need to know. But I still would submit that, we have this framework and we have to see whether or not it can deal with such issues. And if the PLA army has indeed acted in a manner that is not appropriate, then I think we have the right to take it up in a manner that we think is appropriate for the occasion.
Thank you so much, Commodore Uday Bhaskar and Mr. Brahma Chalani, defense experts, and also thanks to our correspondent Jugal Purohit for bringing us this breaking news and sharing their views on this piece of story. But one thing is very clear, that the Chinese side is not learning from the mistakes that they have made in the past, and it completely shows India in a very weak, as a very weak state, in fact, if these go on.